Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. This lecture we're going to look at how we can create an S3 bucket, and it's our very first lab in this section of the course. So you're going to need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so I'm logged into the AWS console, and if we click up here we can see what region we're currently in. I'm currently in North Virginia. I might want to change that over to London because that's where I'm recording this video, but it doesn't really matter for the S3 section. We'll see why in a second. So if you click over onto services, you can see under storage we have S3. We also have Glacier, which is its own independent storage. We also have Storage Gateway, which we'll do a quick lecture on in this section of the course as well. I didn't introduce it in the last lecture just because it is its own service. And then we also have CloudFront, which is down here under Network and Content Delivery, and we're going to create a CloudFront distribution in this section of the course as well. But let's start with S3 and click on S3 over here. So you get the following landing page. The first thing you really need to do is go in and create a bucket. Now, it doesn't matter what region you are when you first log into the console. It will default to that region here, but you can see up here it says global. Okay, so we can see here, create a bucket, select a bucket name and region. Now, if you remember from the last lecture, I told you that the bucket names were a universal namespace. So if we try and register, for example, test bucket, we should get an error message because it's very likely that somebody else already owns that. So go ahead and hit create, and there you go. It says the requested bucket name is not available. The bucket namespace is shared by all users of the system. Please select a different name and try again. Another thing I can try and do is let's try a Cloud Guru and then just some random letters and numbers, and then in here I can change the region. I'm going to leave it as London, but you can choose whatever region you want. If I go ahead and hit create, I'm also going to get a error message saying a bucket name in London region must only contain lowercase characters. And that's pretty much the case for all regions and you're going to find that the case for basically every region. We can even try US standard over here. Go ahead and hit create. And it doesn't matter which region you choose, you're always going to get that same error message. So I'm going to call my bucket a Cloud Guru 2017-SA. Hopefully that will be available. Everyone keeps stealing the A Cloud Guru buckets namespace, and yep, there we go. So we have now created our bucket. Now if your screen looks slightly different, just take a note over here. You've got the none, you've got the properties tab, and you've got the transfers tab, so you just want to make sure it's on properties. And then over here we've got our buckets. So there is my bucket. I can click on it. It's currently empty, there's nothing in it. To go back, we just go back to our all buckets, and again if you want to bring up the properties, you just click on properties. Now depending on when you're watching this video, your user interface might look a little bit different. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to switch to the new UI. So all you have to do is you go down to storage management. You can see here it says storage management features are now available in the new console. Opt in to try storage management. So by opting in, you're going to be able to change the console to what the new console is going to look like, and you can actually opt out at any time. So this is the new console, and I'm going to film the rest of the lectures in this section of the course in the new console. That way when they actually switch over from the old console to the new console, I don't have to re-record them anymore. So in the new console, we can see here we've got our bucket name, we can see what region it's in and what date it has been created, and by clicking on the bucket name I can bring up a whole bunch of different properties. Now if you want to view the properties, for example, just go ahead and click on it, and then you can see in here it's going to give us our different properties. So do we have versioning turned on? Do we want this to be a static website, for example? Do we want logging turned on? So I'm just going to explain a little bit about each tab. So versioning basically is what we explained in the last lecture, so you can have different versions of the same object in the same bucket, and we're going to have a whole lab on that all on its own. Static website hosting, basically you can use S3 to host a website, but it has to be a static website. You can't have server-side hosting, so you can't run PHP on there, for example. But if it's just plain HTML, then you can host it in S3. And the advantage to doing that is that you don't have to worry about any servers, so it's serverless. You don't have to worry about virtual machines and EC2. You don't have to worry about load balancing. You don't have to worry about auto scaling, and we'll explore what those terms are later on in the EC2 section of the course. But the great thing about it is that it scales automatically and it's extremely low cost. So when I worked as a solutions architect, I worked for one of the big film studios. I worked on a project there. They were releasing a very famous movie, and basically we had the preview page all on S3, and we were able to take, I think it was like literally tens of millions of views in a couple of hours when they first released the preview for the film. So S3 just does that automatically. It's extremely low cost and scales, and we're going to have a lab on how to set up static website hosting later on in this section of the course. In here we've got logging, so you can set up log reports as to who is doing what in your S3 bucket, who's making access requests, for example. Now if we actually just scroll down, we've got our advanced settings. So in here we can start tagging our buckets, which is great for cost control. So you can say this bucket is owned by HR, this is owned by our developers, this is owned by the directors. In here we've got cross-region replication, which is where we're going to be able to replicate the entire contents of our bucket to another bucket in a completely different region. And in here is events, so we can configure events or notifications when specific events occur. So perhaps somebody uploads a file to S3 and we want to invoke a Lambda function, and that Lambda function is going to convert a photo into a thumbnail and then save the output of that to another bucket. We would configure that in there. Let's scroll back up to the top and go over to lifecycle management. In here we've got lifecycle management, so this is where we can basically tier off our data to different storage tiers. So we can say, okay, if it's more than 30 days old, move this over to infrequently accessed storage. If it's more than 90 days old, move this over to Glacier. And we're going to have our own lab on this as well. In here we've got permissions. So in here we've got our access control list, and we can basically say who is able to access this bucket. By default, every time you create a bucket, it is private by default. Very, very important to remember that. And same with any object that you upload to the bucket, it's going to be private or inaccessible. And we'll see that on in a few minutes in this lecture. And then down to management, we've got analytics, so we can actually do some analytics of our different storage classes. We can see, maybe we shouldn't be storing this in our standard, storage. Maybe we should be putting this over to standard infrequently accessed because we'll save some money. We've got different metrics in here, so basically we'll be able to see, our total storage, the number of requests that we've had, the data transfer rates, and we can do this over a 1 hour, 3 hour, 12 hour, or 2 week period. And then we've got in here, we've got our inventory, and this is basically reports that allows us to have an inventory of what is in our bucket or a subfolder within our bucket. So let's come back to S3 and we'll go back into our bucket here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to upload a file. So all you do is you click on the upload. I'm going to go in and add my files, and I'm just going to upload the A Cloud Guru logo. Go ahead and hit open. And then what we can do is go here and hit next. We can now set our permissions, so we can make this public or private. Right now I'm just going to leave it as default so we can see what happens if we try to navigate to this image via the internet. Go in here, we can set our properties. So do we want this object to be on standard storage class? Do we want it to be on standard infrequently accessed? Do we want it to be on reduced redundancy? Do we want to be encrypting our object? And if so, how? We're going to use the S3 master key, or we're going to use our key management service. Right now I'm going to leave it all as blank, and then any kind of metadata. This is where you can put key value pairs, so you can do some tagging, for example, of your objects. I'm just going to leave everything as default and hit next. And then that's it. Basically click on upload, and it should be very, very quick because I am in London and this bucket was created in London. And there you go, you can see the object. So let's click on this object, and you can see here in here we've got a link. So what would happen if I click on this link? Do you think we'd be able to view my logo or not? And notice that the link is an open internet link. So it's s3.eu-west-2 .amazon.aws.com. / and then the bucket name, and then / and the actual object name, so logo large.jpg. So if I click on this, we're going to get an error message, and the reason is it says access denied, because I haven't made this object public. Now what I can do is just click back. So we need to make this public in order to be able to view it. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can click on the object and just go to more and click on the make public, or you can actually click on the object's file name, and then in here you can change the permissions. So we click on permissions here, we can go add grantee, and then just click down here and go everyone, or any authenticated AWS user, or log delivery. So I'm just going to do everyone, and we're going to give them permission to read the object. So we go ahead and hit here, then all you have to do is click save. If we go back over here and click on overview, we'll have the link. Now if I click on this, straight away it loads up and I don't get that XML error, so we've made the object public. Okay, so if I click back up here, just go back. Another thing that we can do is change the properties of our objects. So we click in here, we can change the storage class, we can change the encryptions, we can add metadata, we can add tags. So maybe I'll go in and change this to standard infrequently accessed storage class. Or I can go over here and I can change the encryption. So maybe I'll just encrypt the object. So this is server-side encryption. The object's going to be encrypted at rest, which means that if somebody broke into the AWS data center and somehow connected up to S3 and started downloading files, they wouldn't actually be able to see the content of the file. So go ahead and click save, and then that will now encrypt my object. So my object is now encrypted at rest. So that's it for this lecture, guys. Just to get some more experience, go ahead and create some buckets, try and change the storage classes for your individual objects and then for individual buckets, try and make objects public and then private and then public again, and basically just go out and play with S3 and get your hands dirty as much as possible. In the next lecture, we're going to look at versioning. So we're going to create different versions of our objects and what happens when we change those objects. So if you've got the time, join me in the next lecture. Thank you.